Hi, I'm Carmen.
And I'm Steven, and this is Vienna Past and Present,
where we walk through the gilded and sometimes not so gilded halls of Vienna's history.
When we have the time, I guess. Carmen, how have you been? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while, hasn't it? Well, busy, I guess, which is why we haven't done a podcast episode in a while.
Right, it was a couple trips, finishing your program. I think there were some things. Oh, and a move, which I guess is,
Yeah.
I guess that takes a little time.
Took a little time, yeah. I finished a degree. I did travel. I went to Tenerife.
Okay.
Have we done an episode since then? Honestly, I don't even know when things happened at this stage. Yeah, I don't think so either. So yeah, a bit of traveling. And then I also moved house semi-spontaneously. I mean, I knew that I wanted to move, but then it happened a bit faster than I intended. So yeah, I was a bit out of commission for a while.
Yeah, so get back to work. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Leave nothing on your plate. Okay, those all went well, though?
Yes, it went well. I hope that it's not too echoey. I've tried to set myself up a space that works, but it is a new setup, so the audio we'll have to see.
From your brand new pillow cocoon that you just told me about, we hope it works.
I've tried to surround myself with pillows because it's not super furnished yet, and so I think it could be quite echoey, but I hope my pillow cocoon does the job. Yeah. We will find out. All right. How have you been? Have you been up to much? Have you enjoyed the time off?
Work has been kind of busy for me recently. We've had some really nice days here in Seattle as well. So been kind of like some social stuff, a lot of dog parking. I have a dog named Bo. Sometimes you probably hear him in the background, depending on the editing. But yeah, just stuff like that. I want to say I took like a little trip or two. I've been to Portland, just some little local stuff. But yeah, otherwise just waiting here, lonely for us to record. Okay,
well, I'm back.
Rub that in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for the guilty conscience, I know. Okay, yeah, you've been waiting around forlornly, I'm sure.
Yeah, very sad.
All right, well, today's topic is really perfect for this show because it is something from the past that still really shapes Vienna in the present. In fact, it's arguably one of the biggest reasons that Vienna dominates the world livability rankings. When we talk about livability, that implies housing.
Not just water. Okay.
Not just water, although we're proud of that as well.
Oh, yeah.
Not to be overlooked. But obviously housing is a big part of that. And so today we are looking at Red Vienna, which was quite a radical socialist experiment in Vienna that has had a really lasting impact to this day on the city.
Yeah, so first let's rewind and kind of set the stage for when this all started. It's the end of World War I. So when Habsburg rule ended, it's not always clear like how vast and how quick that change was for, Vienna for sure, for Austria, for the Empire, for Europe even. So it's November 18. 4 years of war had passed. The world of the House of the Habsburgs, it collapses almost overnight. So for centuries, they had ruled this vast, very diverse empire between the Alps and the Balkans. Often they had ruled a lot more of the globe than that even.
Yes, we had an episode about that, I think, right? The far-flung colonies. We have
touched on it, yes. Enough of the world that they had like their own AEIOU and, surrounding, mystique, okay? So
and random colonies in places like the Nicobar Islands, lest we forget.
Oh, right. Those. Okay, that's a good episode to revisit if you haven't. Yeah. So when Karl I, the emperor, relinquished power in November of 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire disintegrated into this patchwork of new nations: Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Poland, and also this little landlocked republic initially called German Austria, and soon after that, simply Austria.
I think what's noticeable there is that it kind of divided amongst linguistic lines, right? And so the German-speaking part is what remained, and so that's why it was German Austria.
But the city of Vienna itself didn't shrink, of course. At this moment, it wasn't just a capital city. It had been the center of this superpower for several centuries by that point. It was this huge metropolis. It was, really set up to govern this big, kind of sprawling nation of 50 million people. But suddenly, overnight, it was the capital of this country of barely 6.5 million. that is an 87% decrease in population. Yes, I did do that math.
Wow, I've never done that math. I mean, I guess intuitively I knew that it got way smaller, but 87% really is.
Yeah, and you do feel that, okay, as an outsider visitor, right? I remember the first time I went there, I was like, oh, Austria. I'm like, yeah, like cute mountains and skiing and ... right? So like I get to Vienna and I was like, whoa. I was like, this is like big and opulent, and there's like a lot of just layers of crazy great architecture, and I was just like, okay, you feel a lot more of like the grandness once you get there. So yeah, this part, I feel this factoid. Okay, and I think visitors, you kind of feel it.
Yeah, it's true. It's also the one big city in the country, really. I mean, our second biggest city is like 250,000 people. So
And I guess it makes sense, but I don't know. When I think of other smaller countries, I just think of like smaller capitals than that. Like it still feels kind of outsized, but in a cool way.
yeah, true.
Anyway, the problems at that point, they were immediate. They were pretty brutal. So Vienna had lost its empire, but like Vienna, the city, didn't lose its size, didn't lose its complexity. So the imperial supply chains that fed the city at that point, grain from Hungary, coal from Bohemia, those were now foreign imports. Previous trade agreements, they were these imperial agreements that weren't really considered fair anymore. So blockades, political chaos, choked distribution, inflation spiraled. Then, on top of all that, that winter was particularly merciless. The coal was starting to run low. Children were fainting in their classrooms. I read families burnt their furniture for heat. And the 1918 flu epidemic was just starting up.
Jesus Christ, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was happening at the same time.
A lot at once for this big megalopolis-esque kind of city for the day that suddenly had just its front and backyard to draw from or something. I'm just going to keep adding to this list, because I'm running out of like also words. And we're not done yet. How about that? Housing was a catastrophe at this point. During the war, construction had nearly stopped. So when the returning soldiers, all came back to the city, and refugees arrived from the periphery of the old empire that was now not one anymore, apartments that had been built for one family suddenly had to hold three families. Beds were rented in shifts, which I think Carmen's going to touch on later. Mm-hmm. Tuberculosis was starting to spread, like just a lot of, crowded, sick people, freezing kind of conditions.
Like poor hygiene, right? And yeah, just masses of people, I think, all together, obviously. Probably one reason why there was also a pandemic at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sure this did not help at all. And, like I've been saying, Vienna was just not designed for mass urban poverty. It was more of this imperial showcase kind of city, like with this royal family and their residences and like all of that for centuries. So as happens in chaotic situations like this, political opportunity started to appear. It was in this vacuum with all of the hunger, the illness, the unemployment, humiliation, just kind of generally, new political forces, one called the Social Democrats, began to consolidate power. So that next year, the municipal elections of 1919, the Social Democrat Workers' Party won control of Vienna city government, not narrowly, but very decisively. And now that the empire was gone, Vienna had to reinvent itself, not just as this imperial capital, but as a social capital more. It wasn't quite a revolution in the Bolshevik sense. It was framed more as like a municipal transformation, more practical, administrative, systematic. But Vienna was about to become a laboratory for sure. Like, if the market could not solve this housing crisis, the city was going to. Like, if children were malnourished, the city was going to feed them. And if inequality was structural, which it really was at that point, then policy was going to restructure it. And that experiment came to be called Red Vienna, which, I'd heard of maybe once before talking to you about different topics, Carmen. But yeah, this is one that I knew very little about.
It's a topic that comes up a lot in Vienna. Like the Viennese, I mean, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but it still so much shapes the city, and people will mention it randomly. So Red Vienna is a concept that everybody here understands.
Okay, so that's all kind of the backdrop. Here's what they had on their plates at that point. Like they just got elected. They have stuff like opulent opera houses right next to slums. They had marble ministries. They were overlooking tenements that were overcrowded. They had this city that was built for aristocrats, imperial bureaucrats, and suddenly they had to serve factory workers, the unemployed, didn't have a royal treasury anymore, really. No colonial resources to draw from, no like empire to fund the city externally in the same way, just municipal power. So the Social Democrats, I think they understood that they may never control the national government in the same way. And I think you can look at those elections like in that same year, 1919, and it is different, right? Like in the city itself, the result was so much better for them. But, since they controlled the city, they had some really critical powers like taxation authority, land policy. They could do housing regulation, education, public health. So yeah, there's much more to it. That's kind of the detailed recap, if I may. But if we boil it down and try to fit, into a line that sounds cool to me personally, which is what matters, it's kind of like this. Like if Vienna can't shrink to fit its new, smaller Austria, it's going to transform to fit the people there, at least. So I think that seems to frame it well in my mind, and listen to the rest of the episode, see what you think. But that's knowing what I know that feels right. So
I think that's a really nice framing. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I think Vienna did kind of transform itself to serve the people, and that's what the socialist experiment really was.
Right. And we did put the parts of this episode together kind of separately, so really hope it meshes well. We'll see. But yeah, this brings us to 1919. Now, Carmen will do the hard part.
Okay. Yeah, we kind of have it in two parts this time around, a bit of a different format. But yeah, as you said, the city really became a social laboratory at this point, with the Social Democrats in power. You have this ongoing housing crisis, the hunger, the aftermath of the collapsed empire, everything that you already explained, ended resulted in a very dire situation for the populations. But at the same time, it really created the conditions for something new to emerge. And a main focus for the Social Democrats from the beginning was housing, because that was the main source of a lot of the poverty and strife in the city. There just was not enough affordable housing, and it made life incredibly hard for returning soldiers, as you said, refugees, but also people who were living here anyway. And on top of that, things are getting very crowded because the whole empire is kind of, shrinking, right. But Vienna is attracting a lot of the people who are coming from the peripheries. So something you already briefly mentioned was this concept of people renting beds, and that was called Bettgier in German. And so, when we talk about a housing crisis, it was this dire that the lucky people managed to rent a room, but there were many people that were too poor to even rent a room, and so they rented beds, and they slept in shifts. And so you would rent a bed for 6 hours, sleep, go to work. I mean, these were working people. They would go to work in the factories or wherever they worked, and then they would come back and sleep again. But in between, other people would sleep in that bed.
You just imagine the stress of that. And I wouldn't really know this part because I'm such a good sleeper, and it's something that I brag about. I can fall asleep so quickly. But I mean, for people who can't, how crazy, literally kind of crazy that could make you. Right? If you just couldn't sleep enough ever.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think any of this was quiet at all, right? Because you're renting a bed. There's other people renting other beds probably next to you who are also in shifts, people coming and going. I mean, I think this is like the hostel from hell, basically. But you had a lot of these people that really, couldn't afford anything else. And this was the solution that was found at the time. I do have to say, though, that this phenomenon predated the collapse of the empire. So this was not something that came about because of the collapse.
Oh.
It actually really arose primarily out of the rapid industrialization and the growth of the city around the turn of the 20th century, because, there was a big growth leading up to this whole period with industrialization.
Yeah.
And I found some statistics that around 1900, so around the turn of the century, around 1 in 10 people in Vienna was renting a bed, or sometimes they were also renting a room. But, something like 10% of the population is basically, one step up from homelessness, really, just barely scraping by.
Wow. Okay.
And managing to rent a bed. And the people who rented a bed, they were not even allowed to use the kitchen or the other facilities. They literally were allowed to use the bed, and that was it.
Wow.
So I don't even know how that worked.
Yeah.
It sounds very difficult. People who rented a room, there were a lot of the people also managed to rent a room. They could use the kitchen, and they were kind of seen as part of the apartment.
Okay.
Like it would be today. But yeah, the people renting beds, they didn't really have access to anything. And so the collapse of the empire didn't create this housing crisis, but it did exacerbate it on some level. And at the same time, what you already mentioned was that it created a vacuum for totally new policies to then deal with this problem. Part of it was like partially resolved. The fact that housing was extremely expensive was actually partially resolved by hyperinflation because they froze rents in the immediate post-war period. They froze the rents to 1914 levels. And then there was hyperinflation, which meant that the rents, basically ended up being very, very low. But that obviously created other problems and didn't do anything to solve the space issue and the scarcity issue. And homelessness increased, although actually, it became much more affordable in general because of the hyperinflation. But then, of course, everything else also gets more expensive. So, it's a downward spiral.
Yeah.
But homelessness increased. Even so, the situation leading up to the First World War was that a classic apartment was about 30 square meters, which is around 320 square feet.
Which is pretty small.
That's small. It housed 5 people on average.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it consisted of a bedroom and a kitchen with a shared toilet and running water out in the hallway. So, it's very limited amenities. Obviously, at the time, running water and toilets were still a bit of a luxury to have your own. But this was the situation that people were living in.
Yeah, that sounds so small.
I'm like 30 square meters is too small for me alone. That's like a studio.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very small studio that you're really you are being very strategic about what you even bring in. And I mean, that's before 4 other people move in.
Yes. The whole family in there. So... Yeah, that's the situation. And so to address this, in the post-war period, the Social Democrats, after they came to power, as you mentioned in the 1919 elections, the city then really embarked on one of the most ambitious projects of reinvention, I think, anywhere ever. So starting in 1920, Vienna began building thousands of new apartments, which were known as Gemeindebauten, which means actually really literally means municipal housing. And this was basically buildings that were built and owned by the city. They were built all throughout the city, even in the most affluent areas. And there was a real vision behind this because they were really designed to provide healthy, dignified living conditions for working people. And so these municipal houses, they included large courtyards with trees and playgrounds. They had laundry houses. They had bathhouses, kindergartens, libraries, medical clinics, basically all the trappings of modernity at the time. And the idea was really to help create a healthier and more equal society. And there was a slogan associated with this whole vision, which was Luxus für alle, meaning luxury for everyone.
Wow. Okay, that seems very modern. Are these, what part of these are still functional? Are there still kindergartens or medical clinics in these buildings? Or is it now that space is something else? Or...
Well, I don't know exactly how these buildings now look, but it's a very common thing in Vienna still today, also for newer buildings that have been built, that you have, a doctor in the complex, that you have a kindergarten on site. That's actually very common.
Wow, okay. Sounds like, quite a legacy then. All right.
Yeah, it actually surprised me in a way when I was reading up on this, because I think there was a bit of a period in between where they didn't really build that way, but obviously, there was this early example from Red Vienna, and now today, as you say, very modern. This is what they're doing again with the newer projects that are being built in the last, 15, 20 years. So this all sounds good, right? Luxury for everybody, bathhouses, etc., building all these municipal housing blocks for people to live in, but doesn't come for free, obviously, and it cost a lot of money and had to be paid for.
Oh, that.
Oh, right. Yeah. Minor problem. And so, as you kind of already pointed out, the state wasn't really in a great position to start with. I mean, the empire has just collapsed. The royal treasury is in a shambles. The whole political scene has to kind of be reformed as well. In all of that chaos, they did embark on this great project, and they ultimately did manage it without loans or foreign investment, which is quite good because it kept it very independent. And they relied instead on an innovative tax policy that taxed luxury goods and introduced a highly progressive tax on housing that financed about a third of the construction costs. So that means, people who had houses, who had larger houses, anything that was seen as luxury was taxed quite heavily. So there were taxes on private cars, there were taxes on larger apartments, there were taxes on domestic servants, for example, anything.
Wow.
All of that was taxed. And the idea behind that, of course, was that kind of the rich people of society would be helping to fund housing for ordinary people and would be helping to support the working class, which was the socialist approach. And it worked very well up to a point, but I think you can maybe already see where some of the fault lines might start to form.
Yeah, when like what you're saying already, if I am, try to imagine, 5 years ago, certainly like before this, it was still this imperial capital where there were just like nobles and stuff from various places. So this is such a change.
Yeah, exactly. And they hold land, they have wealth, and then suddenly they're being taxed for everything in order to, build housing for, I guess, what they would have seen as like the common masses.
Yeah, it's such a change for everyone. So, okay.
Another aspect of this that was really important and remains important today is that during this time, the city of Vienna was able to buy up a lot of property very cheaply because the currency also crashed with the fall of the empire. And then,
wow.
Yeah, so the city was in a position to buy up property from, people who were strapped for cash. And the city of Vienna still today remains the biggest owner of land and buildings in the city. And that has helped to keep rents much lower than in other major European cities. Yeah, so it's not nearly as privatized as elsewhere. Of course, there is private housing as well, but more than half is owned by the city. And that keeps the rents fairly controlled. Another aspect that I think is really interesting, because you will see it if you walk around the city, is that transparency was an important aspect of the government funding for building these municipal housing projects. And every Gemeindebau, so every municipal building in Vienna, has large text on the outside of the building that shows the years that it was built and that it was funded by the city of Vienna. And so when you walk around, that's a hallmark of the Gemeindebau. And if you're walking around the city, you will see buildings that have these dates and then, financed by City of Vienna written on the outside. And that tells you that is a Gemeindebau. But they're super integrated. They're not looked down on. They're not, somehow seen as worse than other buildings. So they're clearly designated. It's transparent, but it's not considered negative, really.
Okay. Yeah, that's also remarkable, kind of. Cool.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple aspects to that. One is, I already briefly mentioned it, but they are built throughout all of the city. So you even have them in the first district, which is the center.
It's like the nice core.
Where literally no one lives because it's too expensive, but you have Gemeindebauten there. And so you have some very kind of low-cost housing. And also in the 19th district, which is considered one of the fancier districts, you also have these buildings. So, and one of the buildings that I'm going to talk about in a minute is actually in the 19th district. So it's not like they're clumped together on some peripheral part of the city that nobody wants to go to because it's low-cost housing. It's really integrated into the whole city. And one thing that's a bit controversial, there is debate around this, but, of course it is intended for lower income residents, but there are politicians and really prominent people who also live in these buildings. And that's because you only need to be low earning when you move in, and then there's not really any process for reevaluating your income. So if you move in as a student or, at some point very early in your career when you're not earning very much, you can get one of these apartments and then you don't really have to move out. Even if you end up being, the CEO of your company and earning a lot, you could potentially stay in one of these apartments if you want to.
Interesting.
And so obviously the one side of that is that it could be seen as very unfair because relatively rich people then benefit from very cheap housing, which helps them accumulate more wealth. But on the other side, I think the positive side of it is that it really prevents it from becoming a ghetto or from becoming sort of an undesirable place because you have such a mix of people there. And obviously the people who earn a bit more or, have, more earning potential, they also have more clout and kind of make sure that things get maintained better because they will also invest because it's in their interest to do so.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sure there's so much complexity to these topics, this one too, but yeah, overall your sense is that for the city of Vienna this seems to work well, right?
Yes, it does seem to have worked well. And I will say that there is debate around the fact that, higher earning people can still stay in these buildings. And I think there is now I haven't looked into it recently, but I think there was at least some discussion about having some maximum level that you could earn. But then it's always a question of how do you check that? And, you know, if there's one thing Viennese people are good at, it's finding loopholes and ways to avoid to avoid getting caught by the authorities. We're very good at that. So, you know, but still, on the whole, it seems to work well. So I mentioned before I wanted to talk about one of these housing complexes in particular, and that's probably the most famous one of them all, which is called the Karl-Marx-Hof. This is one that you can still visit today.
Okay.
And in fact, if you go to Heiligenstadt, which is the end station of the U4, you basically cannot miss this place. It's massive. It was named after Karl Marx, obviously in honor of the socialist ideals that were focused on the working class. It was built between 1927 and 1930. But what makes it so remarkable? It's the most famous one of these because it's over 1 kilometer long, and it's one of the longest housing blocks in the entire world. It houses about 5,000 people.
Okay, wow.
So this is like a town unto itself.
Wow. It's sounding very Soviet kind of, but this is like, all right, interesting. It's like before World War II, but this was about 10, okay, so it's like built in 1927, right? So they had been in power for several years, Social Democrats at this point. Okay.
Yes, they've been in power for a couple of years, but they will soon be out of power after this. So when they built this, it was one of these kind of model socialist housing projects where they added all this stuff that was extremely modern to provide a high quality of life for ordinary people. So there were 2 laundromats with 62 wash basins, which, you know, didn't really exist elsewhere. Most people did not have washing machines. Actually, I think nobody had washing machines at this point. When did private washing machines become a thing?
I don't know. We covered bathrooms, okay? Public bathrooms in this show. So maybe we'll put that in the list, okay? When did Vienna get washing machines? It's been requested a lot. Fine, we'll do it.
Yeah, I'm sure people are dying to know. Speaking of public baths, there were also public baths with baths and showers. There were 2 kindergartens. There was a dentist, an emergency care, a post office. So, I mean, it really was a small town. You had everything that you needed. Building. Yeah. And so this really served as a symbol of the heyday of the socialist experiment that went from 1919 until 1933.
Have you been in this building?
I have not been inside. Actually, I would like to go inside. I have walked through it. I think everybody in Vienna has walked through it in the sense that there are these arches that you can walk through, and then you come into a courtyard. You know, people walk through that courtyard very often because to get to some of the tram stops, you kind of have to walk through the courtyard. So I've been sort of in the confines of the building, I guess, but I've not actually been inside an apartment or like in the building itself.
Well, go there, be like, I need a wash basin. It is an emergency. Okay.
I hear there are 62 wash basins.
Yes.
That's what so where are they? Yeah.
We worked it out.
But one thing...
Yeah, expect pictures soon.
Well, I will take a picture, actually. I could post a picture. Because one thing that is, I think, maybe worth pointing out, you said that it sounds very Soviet. And in terms of the ideals behind it, it is, right? It's housing, mass housing for, you know, the working class people. But it's not just like a concrete block. It's got style to it. It's got some color. It's got some decorative aspects to it. So they really tried to make it look nice.
Okay, cool.
You know, it's got a distinctive look.
Okay, yeah, I want to look this up now.
Yeah, so I think in sum, we can say that this experiment really helped bring about a housing revolution that brought modernity to the masses in Vienna. It really invested in the working class. It taxed luxury goods to pay for all of it, and it created a new vision for the city in the aftermath of the collapse of the empire.
Yeah, it's so much changed so fast. To me, this sounds like such a fast pivot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, everything is falling apart. We're renting beds. There's tuberculosis, and then a couple of years later, there's like, okay, we're going to do this all in one: apartment, doctor, school, buildings. And everyone still likes them-ish. Yeah, it's impressive. I mean, at least for this, like, overview we're doing. It sounds cool.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting time to live through. It sounds like a bit of whiplash, honestly, especially given what will come.
Right, and it's like, it's a lasting impact, it sounds like.
Yeah, so it was very highly consequential for the city this period of time. And like I said, it still really has a strong impact on Vienna's high quality of life today. It's considered to have been a great success and is looked back upon very fondly today by the citizens of Vienna. And despite this, though, Red Vienna only actually lasted for about 15 years.
Yeah, like some short and intense.
Short and intense, I think, sums it up. Yeah. It was very ideological. It was experimental. It was this real laboratory of new ideas. But as you may imagine, it also unleashed resistance and backlash in the 1930s. So in our next episode, we're going to look at the end of Red Vienna in 1933, what that meant for the city, and also Austria's turn toward Austrofascism, because it is connected. And the Karl-Marx-Hof will feature again in our next episode, because it was at the center of a short civil war that broke out. But we'll get to that in our next episode, so you'll have to wait for the details on what happened there.
Okay.
Little cliffhanger.
Right. So the setup is like big housing blocks, lots of wash basins. We have solved the, bed renting thing, sort of. But yeah, interesting.
But there's trouble on the horizon, very clearly.
Yeah. Anything else then? Or just leave it on this cliff to hang?
Leave it on this cliff to hang, and we promise we're not going to take another 3 months to resolve the cliffhanger.
There must be a German word for cliffhanger, okay? Like, how close is it?
What is the German word for cliffhanger?
That's another cliffhanger. Don't tell them, okay? Actually, to learn the word, you'll have to tune in next time.
Okay, good. Love it.
Wow.
Thanks for that save.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, that's it for our show. So thanks for listening. And if you liked what you heard, share with your friends or leave us a 5-star review. And if you didn't like it, then, well, don't worry about that review.
You can find us on social medias, Vienna Past and Pres on Instagram, or send us your episode ideas at viennapastandpresent@gmail.com. But no more wash basin ones. We get it. Okay, we'll do it. Fine.
Auf Wiedersehen, pfiat euch, Papa.
Bye.
Did I get you totally out of your groove? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. That's good. But I was like, wait, just the groove of this is weird.